Welcome to the DivorceBuddy.co's Kids First podcast. DivorceBuddy.co's Kids First podcast focuses on children. We share strategies on collaboration, communication, conflict resolution, staying out of court when at all possible, and of course, putting kids first. Our guests are high-integrity divorce and relationship professionals who are thought leaders and visionaries in the field. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Jeremy Cosson. So on today's broadcast, I have Belinda Zylberman from Paikea Mediation, and we're going to talk about mindfulness and divorce and bringing awareness to parents who are going through the divorce that there's a healthier and more mindful way to approach the process rather than suing each other through family court. I first met Belinda in 2014, immediately really sensed Belinda's altruism and passion for helping families. So I'm really excited to have her on the broadcast today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Belinda to the show, and we'll get started. Hi, Belinda. Welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you on as a guest today. Now, in previous conversations we've had, you've shared with me your passion around this line of work and how several life experiences, both as a child and as an adult, really inspired you to get into this field and help families in transition work through issues in a mindful manner. So I was just wondering, first off, how did you get started in mediation, and what specifically inspired you to do the work that you do?
Well, I did my undergraduate studies in communications and anthropology, and then I attended law school. I think back then I sort of had this save the world mentality and was really passionate about people and our relationships to one another. Then I entered a relationship and I got married and I got divorced. And when I was repartnering, I met a man who was going through a divorce himself, but with 2 kids. And the difference in our situations was that he had had kids and I didn't. The fact that there were kids involved, and I really loved his kids a lot, made me think a little differently about how divorce impacts kids and the impact of divorce itself. As I was going through this process with this man and his children, and as a side note, their mom, we were searching for resources and people with whom to create a support structure within which to go through this experience. What we found was pretty negative. People were basically telling us, your kids are doomed. They had all kinds of things to say about the stepmom role and just a lot of things to say about divorce in general. We kind of looked at each other and said, this doesn't feel right, and too many people are in the same situation as us. We can't all be doomed. Later that year, I was certified in divorce mediation, and that was 14 years ago, and I've been passionately doing this work ever since.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about Paikea Mediation and the types of people that you help and what types of outcomes you seek to help them achieve?
Sure. So my practice is a family and divorce mediation practice, and basically the majority of my work centers around families going through a divorce. Generally, I work with couples that have kids because I've observed over time that parents desire to be really intentional about the process. There's mindfulness that goes with being a parent, recognizing your actions and behaviors impact your children and that they're looking to you as role model. The outcome I aim to serve with families I work with is basically well-written, well-thought-out agreements that serve not just the best interests of the kids, but also the best interests of the parents. I think we'll probably be talking about that more later, but it's really important in the divorcing process that we don't forget mom and dad. Divorcing spouses, I think, deserve to have positive outcomes as well as their kids.
So what is the most common obstacle that prevents parents from achieving an outcome that they'll be happy with, not just at the end of the divorce, but long term?
I think this is a great question. I think that the most common obstacle is one that's not obvious to most people at the start of the divorce process. Generally, people enter the process in a variety of ways, maybe with a lawyer, maybe with a mediator, maybe they're trying to sit down and figure it out themselves at the kitchen table. But what they all seem to have in common, in my experience, is their stories, specifically the stories of the people they know who went through a divorce, maybe the stories they've heard online on the news or in their community. And more often than not, these stories instigate fear and this sense of againstness. I found that this can lead to a lot of unproductive conversation for a couple and a family that's committed to making conscious decisions around their divorce. This can often then become the biggest obstacle in terms of the mindset with which people enter their divorce. I can't tell you how many times people come in wanting to give mediation a try because they have this sense that the divorce could happen in a mindful, even loving or caring way, or at least at a minimum in an intentional way. But in the back of their mind, they're positioning. They're thinking, let me make sure I've got the best lawyer in town so my spouse can't get that person first. Or if she's not reasonable about the situation, I'm going to get a lawyer. I'll just take her to court and we'll duke it out. I think that kind of fire is very much fueled by the environment and the discussion that is still prevalent in our society around divorce. Divorce continues to be viewed as a win-lose kind of situation, as opposed to neutralizing it a bit and looking at it more simply and perhaps more honestly as a transition that some of us go through in our lives. It's a big change that some of us go through, but one that can be done with dignity, care, and intention, and that can actually produce long-term positive results even for both the individuals that are separating as well as the kids and other people who are impacted.
Those are some really great points, Belinda. And I like what you said in terms of, if not loving, at least be intentional, because so often parents get caught up in the moment and the anger and the resentments manifest or surface during the divorce process. As you said, they could be thinking in their mind, positioning for having the best attorney. It's really this sort of, as you said, adversarial win-lose process rather than a more healing or therapeutic process that you endorse. Would you say, are there any examples from your professional experience where you've worked with the family, getting too caught up in the conflict, that you were able to help them ultimately achieve an outcome that was best for them and most importantly, best for their children?
Yeah, your question reminds me of the first case I had when I first opened my practice in Portland about 5 years ago. I was working with a family with 2 small children, and they had gone the way of hiring attorneys because they didn't know any better at the time. I would come to learn in our first mediation session that they had actually spent over $20,000 in the initial filing of papers and the discovery process, and they still were nowhere in terms of agreements. Just prior to coming and seeing me, they were about to enter into a round of psychological evaluations where their kids would actually have to be involved and interviewed, and both of the parents were really dreading this. It was around this time that they had heard about me and the work that I do, and they decided to try mediation. They came in really scared about the toll that the divorce was going to take on everyone, particularly the children who were 3 and 5 at the time. This was such a great case for me to learn from because it really highlighted the importance of education and getting people access to resources, of really spreading the word that there are other ways to go through the process. This was a family that was clearly in conflict, as many families are when entering the divorcing process, but their choice to go down the adversarial path was less a factor of the conflict they were experiencing than a factor of not knowing what other options were out there. I think for those who are thinking about getting a divorce or who've gone through a divorce or actually are in the middle of a divorce, getting educated and choosing the way you want the process to go is extremely important. There are books and professionals and resources, all part of a growing community and movement focused on supporting people through divorce that all recognize that there's a different way to live this experience and really, truly a better way.
And that's a great point that you made, because a lot of parents, they really just aren't aware, because socially we think, okay, we have to go down this route that's litigious. At the very least, we're hiring attorneys, when there really is another path that's going to be more beneficial to them and more beneficial to their kids. Now, you also mentioned that you really love this work because during periods of transition, there's actually an opportunity for greater awareness, learning, and healing. And I think most people associate divorce with pain. So how is it that you see these transitional periods as opportunities for growth and healing?
Well, Jeremy, you and I have talked a lot, and this is probably my favorite question, and I could spend days talking about it. It makes me think back to when I was a teenager and my parents were separated. And then years later, both of my parents actually died. And considered over time that, death and divorce are huge periods of transition. And I've thought about the meaning of these events. With my parents' separation, I always felt like they didn't really want to talk about it. I was already a teenager, and in their minds, it didn't really impact me as I would be heading to college. But I felt like I needed to understand the meaning of it, and I needed to understand why things happen and get underneath it. When I was going through my own divorce and getting remarried, that came up again for me, that need to understand what I could learn from these transitions and from these experiences was as significant as going through them. I think for me, living these experiences and then moving into a career where I spend time with people going through transitions, divorce, death, generally painful and challenging situations, has all led me to create a philosophy around the purpose of relationships and the awareness that they exist for our learning, our growth, and our healing as human beings. In terms of the growth and healing possibilities that divorce presents, I've observed in couples, with many couples, when we look at the relationship itself as an opportunity for healing and growth, what we discover is that it's the moments of adversity as much as the moments of joy and connection that teach us some of our greatest lessons. I think the divorce process can be an incredible time for growth, just as with the passing of a loved one. Many people have compared divorce and death, reporting that the feelings, the experience, and the grieving can be the same or similar at least. I think that divorce gives us this moment in time to sort of stop, reevaluate, and consider our lives through the pain. And we're not talking about not feeling the pain, because it is painful and we're having to let go of long-held hopes and dreams, to let go of a way we viewed life, and then be thrust into having to think about our lives as single parents, divorced men and women, and alone that we never really wanted to imagine. And I think this is where reflection and time can be really redeeming. Learning to view the situation from the perspective that the relationship is not over, but rather transitioning. All of our relationships become about healing and growth and learning. When we're getting divorced, one of the things I always share with parents in the first session is you're getting divorced and you're ending your marriage relationship, but you're moving into a relationship as co-parents. There's still a relationship there. Let's not be mistaken, but simply evolving and becoming something else. So why not then consider the possibility that this relationship is now an opportunity for healing and growth, as it will be one that's going to be with you for many years to come.
Those are great points. It's a theme that we try to carry through, that there's a relationship that exists irrespective of what's happening, whether you're divorced or not. You still have that relationship because you're bound together with your children.
That's right.
Now, you speak a lot about mindful divorce or a well-lived divorce. Can you expand more on what you mean by a well-lived divorce?
Sure. I think it goes to the point that we were just making. I had new clients in yesterday, and as they sat in front of me, I could see that at one point they were on the verge of getting upset and triggered. And shortly after, we did a little work together, and they were sort of calming down and relaxing with each other. Made me think that in any transition, and divorce is a great example, it's a time of great triggering moments. And those triggering moments are actually, or could be considered, an opportunity to really experience human emotion. When I think of a well-lived divorce, I think about a scenario I ask parents early on in the process. I have them imagine their children as young adults in their 20s, for example, and they're having conversation with them. Then I ask them how they would want this conversation to go. What would they say to them about the divorce process, about the other parent? And I offer all kinds of questions for their consideration, because this is their process, and questions will elicit different responses depending on the listener. For me, the key is not so much the message they choose to share with their quote unquote future children, but the intention with which they experience the future experience in the scenario. This exercise can serve to shift the parent's entire view of the divorce, which is happening in the present. And often is the case, as they turn to each other after going through this process, they're heart-centered, they're humble, and they shift into a mindset of making solid agreements with everyone's best intentions in mind. Often people don't experience having a choice in divorce because one person is instigating the divorce while the other may believe that there's still a possibility to work things out. But beyond the initial decision to divorce, I believe we really do have a lot of choices. We have choice in how we behave. We have choice in how we choose to react or not react. We have choice with our words and choice in how we're being with ourselves as we go through the process. I think a well-lived divorce is one where we say to ourselves, I'm giving myself a lot of compassionate self-forgiveness through the process. I'm doing the best I can to understand what I can. I really am doing the best that I can. And I'm looking to my future ex and saying to myself that he or she is doing the best they can. I'm committed to going through this process with awareness.
Now, you mentioned... So I'd like to tell you about a book that I think you really enjoy reading. It's called The Putting Kids First in Divorce book. And it's a #1 best-selling book now available on Amazon. You can either go to Amazon.com and search Putting Kids First in Divorce, or go to the divorcebuddy.co website. We discuss and go into a lot of detail on all of the different things that we cover on this show, including how to preserve relationships and protect children during and after the divorce. And we bring together 11 leading divorce co-parenting and relationship professionals who all share their insights and perspectives on communication, conflict resolution, and supporting children through a transition. So you'll learn about alternatives to litigation, such as collaborative law, mediation, and divorce coaching, which of course are far less adversarial and more economical than family court. It's a really easy to read interview format style book. Again, Putting Kids First in Divorce. It'll enlighten, empower, and inspire you. So again, support the podcast, and we hope you enjoyed the book. So just visit Amazon.com, search on Putting Kids First in Divorce, or you can go to the divorcebuddy.co website, and under resources, we have a whole list of different books that you might find helpful. That you went through your own divorce and you have children. So what do you think are some of the most, maybe the greatest misconceptions you think that parents have about the divorce process? And how can these misconceptions have a negative impact on children? Parents aren't conscious of the potential pitfalls.
As I mentioned earlier, when I was re-partnering and choosing to be with a man who had children, the literature, our friends, even a well-renowned therapist we saw, all steered us in this direction of doom and gloom. Entering the world of divorce, ex-spouses, and step-parenting could only lead down this dark and lonely path. I'll never forget one thing that the therapist said in one of our early sessions. He said, I have clients in their 30s and they're still angry and upset about their parents' divorce. And I remember feeling the pit in my stomach after hearing that and thinking, can it really be that this is what we're subjecting them to? Can it be the only possible outcome? And how can we do this to these kids? And we had so much shame and guilt going through that. For many people that I see who are ending a marriage and beginning a new relationship, oftentimes it happens that there's not a lot of time between the ending of one and the beginning of another. And questions of uncertainty and guilt and shame with regard to our children can so easily arise. I think that the key is turning towards sources and people and a philosophy that support a view that this is a transition and we do have a choice about the meaning and interpretations we place on it. Meaning it's not intrinsically bad or good. It's really the experience that each of us makes of it. And I will often use the example of nature when I'm speaking with clients. There's winter, there's spring, there's summer, fall. You experience it differently depending on what state or country or continent you live on. We don't get angry when the trees lose their leaves, and we don't get angry or upset when the snow covers the ground or when the sun melts the snow. We simply call this nature, which is made up of transitions, and they're natural and they're neutral. We could certainly debate all day, and anyone going through a divorce today would have good reason to say, how could you possibly say divorce is neutral? And any reasonable person could argue that it's not, far from it. But perhaps, the value to be found here as we engage in another way of viewing divorce and consider other possibilities is not in arguing how divorce is an awful, painful, terrible thing, but rather considering the possibility that it could be something else if we're being mindful and intentional.
Yeah, I like the analogy that you use with the seasons. It's a really good analogy. Now, you mentioned a lack of awareness that a lot of parents have in terms of methods and what to do when they're getting a divorce. Most parents think that the first step when getting divorced is to hire an attorney as soon as they make that decision. So two-part question. First, why is it beneficial to hire professionals such as yourself early on in the process? And second, if advising a parent on how to divorce in a manner that will be the least destructive on their children, what process do you recommend?
There are a plethora of professionals and resources out there today that will serve families who want to have a good working co-parenting relationship after the divorce. I actually think that contrary to what a lot of mediators might say, I think going to an attorney early on in the process can be informative to educate you about the law and provide some important information about the process if they're approached for this specific purpose. I think the key here is how you approach the entire process, where lawyers, mediators, and other professionals are there to support you. Finding a support system and a set of professionals that reflect your beliefs about how you want to live your divorce and create the foundation for your future co-parenting relationship. I think for me, the difference between working with an attorney and working with a mediator is pretty straightforward. With an attorney, more often than not, you're not having face-to-face conversations with your soon-to-be ex. And I think for many people, that's appealing. You get to have an advocate defending your rights and your position, and you get to have this barrier or safety zone between you and your soon-to-be ex. Of course, what this also means is that you're not having some of the most important conversations of your life with the person you really need to be having them with. The mediation process, in its simplest definition, is one where two people in a divorce, that's the spouses or the partners, are able to come and sit at the table together and have these often life-changing conversations. My intention is to support people in moving towards healing and compassion and understanding, and most importantly, clear and very specific agreements. In my experience, as I observe families moving through the mediation process, they're really creating hope for the future as they work to serve the highest good for everyone in the family. And I really believe that mediation can and does create that opportunity for families. What I think is really important to make clear is that whether it's an attorney or a mediator or another professional that you choose to support you through the process, getting yourself educated is the key. Doing enough research and really asking the important questions that include, how do I want to go through this process? What kind of support do I think I need? Who would be the best person to support me? As I was speaking with the wife in one of the families I mentioned earlier, one of the first things that she told me, that her initial reaction based on information she's getting from friends and family members, was to go get the toughest attorney who could litigate and get everything she wants. And I thought, wow, okay, this is her starting point. And that gave me a lot of information about how to go forward with the couple. Attorneys, the way they work, we've all heard some horror stories and some good ones also, and that will work for some people. But in my experience, for the majority of people today who are really trying to be more mindful and conscious as they enter and go through the divorce process, getting the toughest attorney to litigate is not going to be the route that gets you to solid agreements and support everyone in the family.
Right. And of course, it's that litigious adversarial process, win or lose, where mediation is really about finding cooperative solutions. And it's interest-based instead of position-based. Also, you made some other great points. What you think you want at the time versus reflecting back maybe 5 years, 10 years from now, that's going to change. It's going to evolve. It may also change in terms of the dynamics. So what may seem appealing to have a proxy argue on your behalf, you basically dissolve that ability to communicate. One of the benefits, I think, of mediation is really that it does preserve the ability to communicate and also for the parents to be really heard.
Definitely.
Now, Belinda, if there was one thing that you'd want all parents to really understand, what would that be?
I think that the most important thing is that no matter what anyone's situation is, and I've seen a vast range of family dynamics going through divorce, the thing to remember is that each of us has a lot more ability to affect change in the situation than we might actually believe we do. When I say this, what I mean is that many times I've sat across from two people and observed that what was most needed was simply the ability to be quiet and listen, or to be open to looking at something in a different way. The person we show up as, the mindset we choose to have when we're in the situation has everything to do with the resolution of it. And I believe that that's very much in our control.
Any closing thoughts or any closing lessons that you'd share with parents?
I think this is a lesson for each of us as parents, and a really important one to pass down to our children. I think it's important to consider that it's not the event itself, the divorce, that's the issue. It's really how we relate to it as we're going through it. When we're talking about a couple entering the divorcing process, and I see time and time again, people who come in with clear intention, integrity, and a true willingness and commitment to go through the process. These are the families that create the results they committed to from the beginning. The couples that come in who are more committed to the past and the hurt and focusing on the blaming and the shaming and really the denigration of the relationship, they really end up having to work a lot harder to get those kind of results. What I've learned over time, and I believe from personal experience, both, my own experience and of course working with clients, is that when you claim from the beginning that the divorce itself is not what is determining or creating our reactions, but rather our approach to the divorce is, then we're really empowered to live the experience in a different way. And one way may be to embrace this as a transition, that it's an event we can fold into the story of our lives, and one story of many that has helped to shape us, and one that helps us to know ourselves better.
I think you captured that brilliantly. It's not the event itself, but how we choose to go through the event. So how we process it, going through with intention, it's definitely great advice. Now, finally, you've got another book coming out. A lot of people want to find out how to reach out to you. How can the reader find out a little bit more about you and contact you and maybe speak about the book project as well?
Sure. So I'm located in Portland, Oregon, and mostly I see local clients, but I am starting to reach out to people via the web. I'm always available through my website or phone, and I'm happy to do a 15-minute to 30-minute consultation. So I'm just always happy to hear from people. And if I can't serve them directly, I'm happy to support them with resources and referrals. In terms of the book, it's pretty exciting. It's revolving around healing through relationship. I'm hoping for it to be in the process of publishing by the end of 2016. And specifically, it revolves around this notion of shifting what it means to be in a family and to be in relationship. And it addresses the landscape today of partnership, marriage, and parenting, and looks at the unique dynamics people face today, as so many of us, perhaps the majority of the U.S. population today, have been somehow touched by divorce.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Belinda. It's always a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for joining us on the DivorceBuddy.co's Kids First podcast. Be sure to subscribe to us on Stitcher and iTunes, and don't forget to visit DivorceBuddy.co for further resources, including podcasts, show notes, tips, blogs, and discounts. And remember, as Karen Bonnell, author of the Co-Parent's Handbook, is fond of saying, when it comes to a child's sense of family, when divorce breaks apart, solid co-parenting rebuilds. You'll never regret taking the high road and resolving conflict and putting your kids first. I'm Jeremy Cosson. Thank you for listening.